Reformation, which was largely the work of the Jesuits. That is okay. All coherence is gone. We'll reorganize it, and we'll make it like a military thing. And we will take it on faith. If the church teaches this, this, and this, that's true. We don't question it. We take it on obedience to the point that would have astonished a medieval theologian.
Yeah, well, there is. I can't remember the exact. It's very famous. It's always quoted, especially in books that are antagonistic to Catholicism. It's a phrase in which Saint Ignatius says, if the church taught that black is white, then by gosh, black is white.
Yeah, 2 is 5. He says it.
He says that very explicitly.
He explicitly says it, and he's wrong.
Yeah,
I mean, great saint that he is, he's wrong.
Yeah.
But that was the attitude, and you can see why he said that. That is, he had come from the University of Paris, very different from the one when Saint Bonaventure and Saint Thomas were teaching. He came from the University of Paris where everything was questioned. And where he turned and said, well, I can't answer these things. These are the most brilliant people in the world. I'm just going to follow the leader. And the Jesuit order is based on that idea of obedience. And it saved not only the church, it saved the world. I mean, wherever they went, they did establish order. But what we see here is an order. Now, understand this. It's an order based upon the will rather than on the reason. That is, if you say, if the church says black and white or 2 and 2 is 5, what you're saying is my will is stronger than my reason. Now, St. Thomas would have, again, been puzzled by that. I think he would have been puzzled. He would say, well, I don't understand. It never occurred to me that they had quarreled. He wouldn't have understood that there was a problem. St. Thomas thought the faith and reason were sisters. There's nothing irrational about the faith. St. Thomas says, oh yes, I know. We hold things on faith that we can't prove, but they're perfectly reasonable. And he goes on to say, and that's why they can't be disproved. And therefore, a defense of the faith is always made negatively by disproving those that disprove. It's a negation of a negation. But it never occurred to Thomas that the faith itself is irrational. But that's what you get in Pascal. I mean, you begin to get a kind of a crazy faith. That is, I will believe even though I know it's absurd.
And of course, what happened was that reason, that the range of reason was greatly restricted in the Renaissance. Once again, in this case, by the scientists, by the new science, by what Nunn called the new philosophy. They said, well, reason is admirably suited to dealing with measurable reality, which means material reality, and it really is out of its depth when it attempts to deal with anything else. So natural theology itself is called in doubt. That is, we say, well, we really don't know anything about God except what is revealed, and the best thing to do about that is just accept it. Don't argue about it. Don't think about it. We will hold to those truths that are explicitly expressed in Scripture, and we will defend those truths as being authoritative, but we're not going to speculate about them.
We're not going to defend them as being reasonable.
No, not as reasonable. No, they're
different order.
They're true because they are authoritatively expressed in the Bible, and we will accept them. But we will not go into theology, and we will not go into philosophy that is still philosophizing about such things as the soul. Reason,
or even the Trinity.
Or the Trinity, or any of those subjects. The reason is not equipped to do that. The reason is admirably equipped to deal with the things of this world, the material things of this world. And we can do wonderful things with the reason. We can make marvelous discoveries about the world if we will just employ this method of measuring things and observing things and drawing conclusions from things and experimenting with things. And all of that worked. It all worked so well that everybody said, well, that must be right. This is the general way that it happened. And so reason is banished from considerations having to do with God, whether in theology or whether in philosophy. And reason was, really kicked out of religion.
That happened in the 18th century. I think what we have here is a sequence of events taking roughly 100 years each. That first doubt, which we call the Renaissance or the Reformation, and that's where Hamlet is. That's the beginning of the whole thing. And then in the next generation, you have the religious warfare. You have a century of terrifying struggle of the will, where one faith struggles with another faith, a kind of irrational universe of clash. We call it the Baroque period in art, which illustrates this struggle. And then in the 18th century we have peace. That is, nobody's going to win this war. There's no way we're going to win. So what we'll do is you will divide Europe. Is this the diet of worms? Those countries that are Catholic stay Catholic. Those countries that are Protestant stay Protestant, and we'll live happily ever after. And even within nations, there was peace of that kind. That is tolerance. All right, we'll permit you to do this as long as you permit us to do that. In this quarrel between theology and reason, we have separate spheres. It got into the United States Constitution. One of the most famous phrases, we hear it all over the place in the United States, but I think it's quoted in Europe as well: separation of church and state. That is okay, but religion is one thing, the state is another. And there's a wall of separation between the two. And as long as you keep up that wall, then each can be happy in its own way. And again, if you go back to St. Thomas, he would have just, I don't think he would have been appalled so much as he would have been puzzled by a statement like separation of church and state. I mean, what? We're talking about a hierarchical order. We're talking about a relation. It would be like saying separation of husband and wife.
That's another aspect of the same thing.
Well, yeah, the Great Divorce. Was it Lewis who wrote a book called The Great Divorce? It's a good title.
No, in fact, that whole business of separation, of antagonism, that's faith and reason is one of those antagonisms. Because you find them everywhere.
Immanuel Kant is the great philosopher of antinomy. It's the same word, separation.
Yeah, and you see the poets like Shakespeare and like Donne. They saw all this just as Hamlet sees it. They don't see it quite clearly. They can't, of course. It hasn't all happened quite yet, but they see it. Oh, they feel it in their bones, in their soul, their prophetic soul. They can see this great rift opening up, this abyss that we were talking about, opening up at their feet in everything, in the state, in society, between men and women. And we, now, in our position, looking back, well, it's very obvious. Now, we can see it all very clearly, this warfare, this antagonism that exists in every aspect of the world. So we can, that's what we think really accounts for the blighted view of the world that Hamlet has. He in the next soliloquy. I
would say, where's soliloquy 2? Because
there is a soliloquy. I don't know if there's a soliloquy short, that comes just at the end of Act 1.
It's not given a number.
Yeah, it's called, that's the one where he's talking about his uncle. Again, after he is found out, this is in Act 1, Scene 5, where he discovers, after the ghost has spoken to him, and he talks about his uncle, old villain, smiling. This is before his friends come out to talk to him.
Yeah, it's not listed as one of the four.
No, it
soliloquies
usually
because
is. This is the
but
fifth.
it's
Yeah,
true that it's true that he is alone.
he's
Yeah.
alone. He says,
"Oh, most pernicious woman, villain, smiling, damned."
yeah, oh, that's the heart of it. Oh, most pernicious woman. Again, he's on women. Oh, villain, smiling, damned villain. My tables, his notebook. He's a student, you know. Meet it is I set it down that one may smile and be a villain. At least I'm sure it may be so in Denmark. So, uncle, there you are. Well, that's, as I say, that's usually not a comedy. But it's a kind of an aside. But it's the same sort of thing. That is that same blighted.
We might add that there are frequent asides also where Hamlet speaks in an undertone and nobody else hears. He speaks his mind rather than to somebody.
Yeah. But the next one is oh, what a rogue, peasant slave am I in Act 2, Scene 2. I haven't written down here. So Act 2, Scene 2.
Again, you get a great aria here where Hamlet.
He says that Mr. Senior likes this at the beginning words of that soliloquy there. It's about line 575. Now I am alone. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern have been there talking to him, and they are just awful people, and he's very, very annoyed by them. They finally leave, and the players leave. He says, "Now I am alone." Oh, again he starts. Oh, what a rogue and peasant slave am I. Now it's self-hatred. Self-hatred. Is it not monstrous that this player here, but in a fiction, in a dream passion, could force his soul so to his own conceit that from her working all his visage wan, the tears in his eyes, distraction in his aspect, a broken voice of his whole functions suiting forms to his conceit, all for nothing, for Hecuba. What's Hecuba to him, or he to Hecuba, that he should weep for her? What would he do had he the motive and the cue for passion that I have? He would drown the stage with tears and cleave the general ear with horrid speech, make mad the guilty and appall the free, confound the ignorant and amaze indeed the very faculties of eyes and ears. Yet I, a dull and muddy mettled rascal, peak like John a dreams, unpregnant of my cause, and can say nothing. No, not for a king upon whose property and most dear life a damned defeat was made. Am I a coward? Who calls me villain? Who breaks my pated cross, plucks off my beard and blows it in my face, tweaks me by the nose, gives me the lie in the throat as deep as to the lungs? Who does this to me? Ah, swoons I should take it, for it cannot be that I am pigeon-livered and lack gall to make oppression bitter, or ere this I should have fatted all the region kites with this slave's awful, bloody, bawdy villain, remorseless, treacherous, lecherous, kindless villain. Oh, vengeance. And then he changes. Why, what an ass am I. Now he reproaches himself for all his reproaches. This is most brave, that I, the son of a dear father murdered, prompted to my revenge by heaven and hell, must, like a whore, unpack my heart with words and fall a cursing like a very drab, a scullion. Self-disgust, fie upon the foe. About my brain hum I have heard, and then he talks about his plan to catch the king in the play, within the play. Ending with play is the thing where you catch the conscience of the king.
Again, the modern themes, that is, the first soliloquy raises the whole question of the unweeded garden of the world and suicide. That is, everything's hopeless. Now, in the second soliloquy, certain other modernistic notes come out. One of the most important is this whole idea of the play. That is what he's talking about here, right from the start. This is a meditation on a company of traveling players. They've come to Elsinore, to the capital of Denmark. They've come to the court, and they're going to put on a play. They're traveling players. It's a show, like a circus. Weren't we talking about circuses last time? I think we were. There is it's a modern theme. That is, Shakespeare is again haunted by the idea that all of this is a play. In one of his most famous speeches in another play, he says, "All the world's a stage." It's from one of the comedies. And we are merely players in it. That's the one about the 7 ages of man. He's haunted by that idea in almost every play he writes.
Very end of his career, the very last play, usually taken as his last play, The Tempest. The great magician, the Prospero, he puts on a play that's made up. It's the actors in it are spirits, because he's a magician, and then he causes it all to vanish, and he says to the young people for whom he has put on this pageant, it's a very, very famous speech that I can't repeat, but he says, all this, this is like the world. He said, it's all just illusion. This pageant is all these marvelous things that you saw. They're just like the world. They are insubstantial. The phrase is like this unsubstantial pageant faded. Whole world, he said, will fade just as that has faded.
It's
an illusion.
Hallucination.
The world is. I mean, now again, you say, well, of course, Christians have always said the world is unsubstantial and it will all die and all that sort of thing. But this is different.
There's a line in Chaucer almost directly like it, and I'm sure we quoted it at the time. It's in the Knight's Tale, and we talked quite a bit about it. I think it's old Aegeus who says it. I can't remember. Maybe it's Theseus. This world is but a thoroughfare full of woe.
So old Aegeus.
And we've been pilgrims, passing to fro. That is, for Chaucer, and the world isn't a show; it's a pilgrimage. Now it's going to pass. I mean, we're it's not our home. It's very, very obvious that the world is not our home, but we are on a road. For Chaucer, the world is a highway, or a byway, or a path. We're on a pilgrimage to the kingdom of heaven. But the difference is overwhelming. That is, for Shakespeare, maybe. Now, he doesn't lay this down as a religious axiom. It's always raised as a speculation. It's always raised as a perhaps, as a metaphor. But it certainly is raised. Maybe this world is nothing but a play. And therefore, when the curtain falls, it's the end. It's nothing. There isn't any kingdom of heaven. The difference between all the world's a stage and all the world's a pilgrimage is so profound. I think we could sort of tack it up on the. In addition, teachers used to use when they had home rooms in the old days. In addition to the blackboard, which they erased at the end of every hour, they would tack things up on the wall to be remembered. In the Latin classes, you would tack up, amo, amos, amat, because that was one of the permanent things that had to be remembered throughout the semester. Well, here we might put up on the wall, all the world's a stage and we've been pilgrims, and just put those two phrases up and then say, well, meditate on that. You've got a profound difference in view about everything, not just about something, but about.
Well, that again is one of those modern themes. Life is but a dream. Life is a dream. Oh, how many modern writers have said that. That's the name for play. Spanish play. La vida es sueño. Life is a dream.
A streetcar named Desire, says Tennessee Williams. It's everywhere, isn't it? I mean, it's absolutely everywhere.
Lewis Carroll, very last poem at the end of his second book about Alice in Wonderland It's about he kind of gives a resume of the whole thing, the whole enterprise. He says all these stories, he said, came to me when we were floating down the river. These young girls and I was telling them these stories. He said, but in the end, he says, what is life but a dream? That is, Alice goes to sleep, you see, and she dreams the whole of the first part of Alice in Wonderland. The second time she goes through the mirror.
You're nothing but a pack of cards. The whole thing ends when she wakes up.
Then she wakes up.
And then it's a
game
of chess.
He says himself, what is life but a dream, after all? At the very end, that's his last
In fact, that
words,
little poem is sort of outside the story, and I think it's meant to be a very beautiful little lyric. That's not nonsense verse. I think he's speaking out of his heart there.
He is.
Yeah.
Oh, he feels it very deeply.
Yeah, he feels that deeply. That is, Lewis Carroll is full of nonsense verse, of which he's a master. But that last poem is a kind of soliloquy. I think Lewis Carroll himself takes over and speaks from the heart, and it's sentimental.
Yeah,
it's not the best thing by any means.
No, not at all.
But it's revealing. But it's
great statement. It's revealing, and it you understand the meaning
really
of Alice in Wonderland and all those things. He says, well, really.
It's one of the reasons he liked childhood, because he thought, well, childhood is especially dreamlike, and isn't it too bad that we grow up?
Right.
This becomes a theme in children's literature at the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th. It's just absolutely everywhere. It's even in the best of it.
Well, Peter Pan is the great exemplar of this theme.
That's not the best of it.
Not the best of it. No, I didn't mean it to be the best of it, but it's
certainly
the
most revealing,
obvious,
yes.
and well known,
yes.
popular idea that you could remain a child forever and live in your own imagination, live in a kind of fairyland which you made up, not a real fairyland, but a fairyland which is of your own making, where you can control the events and have. Create your own.
Yes. Again, there's none of that in the Grimm brothers.
No.
Because it's not made up.
No. Those are real. There are real ogres out there.
You don't control them.
No. But the idea increasingly is that since life is a dream, well, it's also a play. You can make up the characters.
But we're
for
all
yourself.
nice guys in costumes. Captain Hook in Peter Pan is a pirate, but he's really an actor.
Yeah, he's a parody. He's
Playing
a parody of
and we know it, and the children know it. In fact, frequently during the play, the actor will sort of slip off his mask, and he winks at the children and says, "Now, don't be afraid. It's only a play."
Yeah.
Everybody knows it's only a play. Whereas in Mother Goose, it's not a play.
Yeah.
There really are monsters out there, and they'll really kill you. Nobody really gets killed in Peter Pan. It's all a game.
It's all a game. They're making it up. They can, if they don't like the way it's going, they can just change it by their own wills.
Oh, gee, we could get into this as a theme. Here it is. This is the second soliloquy. The modern world is haunted by the idea of art. This idea of art. That is that art is something you make up. And Shakespeare, of course, is haunted by it. And as you say, the whole of the last play is about that. The magical quality of art. That is, maybe art is something we make up, and maybe we can make it do anything we want. Now,
that is, it's independent of nature.
Exactly. It's not an imitation of it, as
Shakespeare says in this play, or Hamlet says specifically, this is the source of the great statement. He says it to the players that art should hold up the mirror to nature.
He's being classical.
Yeah, he's being classical. And he says he's giving them a little lesson, and he dislikes the kind of acting which distorts nature. He says no, it should hold the mirror up to nature and show its exact form. He's very, very orthodox about art there. But this is what you find in Shakespeare all the time. He's
halfway.
He's got one way.
He's got one foot in the old world, and one part of him is Catholic. And it's quite right to say everybody in this play is a Catholic. And whenever the chips are down, the old Catholic ideas are there, like prayer and so on. They're there. But then there's this doubt and you get both.
You're torn.
Torn.
You're torn. You have that. Of course, that's what drama is.
But by the
drama
modern,
becomes.
but by the 19th century, it's no longer a quarrel.
Oh no.
It's art for art's sake,
Yeah.
and everything is made up. And not only, I mean, what we get in this theme of art in the modern world is that first the idea is, well, all right, we'll have a divorce. Again, as we had the separation of church and state, now we'll get the separation of art and nature. It's exactly the same idea applied now. There's another one of these Kantian antinomies. Am I pronouncing that word right?
Yes.
Antimonies. And Kant has a whole book about it. I confess, and I'll make a little aside, I've never been able to read it. It's called The Critique of Judgment. I've read about it, and I've held it in my hands, and I've weighed it, and it's a weighty book. It's a weighty book. But I understand from reading about it and taking courses in it and looking at it that his thesis really is exactly that. That is, art is its own mode of being, and it doesn't have to be called into the court of reason.
No, it can't be.
It can't be.
It's in a different category.
Aesthetic category of its own.
He created aesthetics.
Right.
He created aesthetics.
And that's the great divorce. Now Hamlet, when he says hold the mirror up to nature, no, he's that's exactly what Kant is rejecting. But after the 18th century, then what you get is an art which considers itself to be totally independent of nature. Okay, one step more. In the 20th century, we've gone on beyond that. We've got people who say nature itself is an hallucination.
We can make nature to be anything we want it to be. And it doesn't mean just altering it in some sort of scientific way. They've gone beyond that. You see, that's Descartes' project. He said we can become the masters of nature, and we can control nature. Well, the scientific project has been attempting that for ever since Descartes, and they've succeeded to some extent, but it's perfectly obvious now to everyone that that's not going to work, and that it creates very bad effects. That is, the attempts to control nature not only failed, but it's spoiling nature. So, but that project, I think, has been gradually, although there's still many people who believe it, it's gradually it's old-fashioned. Whereas now people are saying, oh no, you don't have to actually do anything with it. It's all in your mind. Your mind is the source of reality. This is merely following out the Kantian presuppositions. That is that the realities of the mind are the only realities, and that apparent reality out there that we call nature, or used to call nature, is after all only an illusion, and that we can shape it to be anything we want it to be. We can shape love, for example, not to talk about material nature. That is, we can recreate new kinds of love. We can, in the alchemy of our minds and our own emotions.
It's Jung.
Yeah.
The notion that everything is in your mind. In Kant is still recognizes the limitations of the mind.
Yeah.
That is, he says there are categories, and he takes these as absolute. That is, the mind works in certain ways, and it works absolutely in those ways, and therefore he does come up with a kind of objectivity. You begin to play with words. It's a subjective objectivity. That is, it's an objectivity of the mind, but we can't change it. That is, we are born with certain predispositions to understand in certain ways, and that can't be changed. But that's no longer believed. People now say, well, Kant, you were right when you said everything was in the mind, but you were wrong when you said they couldn't be changed.
Yeah. Well, they've just taken it all the way. Once you take that step, of course, the next step is inevitable.
Well, he couldn't stop it, could he? I mean, in a way, they're working out the implications of Kant's own stance. Why not change it then?
Yeah.
What do you mean? 2 and 2 is 4.
Yeah.
Let's make it 5. And we'll work out a geometry or an arithmetic in which It's right. 2 and 2 is 5. I've heard students, sophomores who had freshman math, all full of this modern, they call it modern math. They have smart Alex, and they'll come into your class and they'll say, well, 2 and 2 is 5 if you want to work it out in a certain mathematical system.
Different base.
Yeah,
Starts with
change the base.
Yeah.
And you say, yeah, but look, here's a piece of cake. 1. Here's another piece of cake. Now there are 2. They say there's nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
Nothing to do with
It
it.
does, that's the point. That's exactly the point, of course.
You say, that's right, it does.
If you start talking about reality, if you start talking about concrete things, then of course the whole thing breaks down. There's no correspondence between the mind and what the mind does and what the real world out there is.
You can't change that cake to base 10. I suppose there are people on the stock market who think they can.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, economics is working that out, and people are getting, become billionaires on the basis of and hallucinatory currency. It was John Maynard Keynes in England.
Yeah.
I don't know again whether he's known on the continent, but in England, America, he was the dominant force in the 1920s and 30s, and that's exactly what he said. Economics is the manipulation of money. It's a decision. It's in the will. It's a decision. It's a political decision.
Yeah, you can manage economies. It's the whole idea of a managed economy, and you can create demands and create needs. You get advertising working in there. I don't mean that he was talking about that particularly, but it certainly follows from that. You can. You don't have to simply make goods to satisfy human needs.
Manipulate currency even. He got it down to something as simple as playing around with the symbols of money. That is, currency is a mathematical idea. It stands for wealth. As a dollar stands for so much butter. Once you say, oh, the heck with the butter, we'll just work with the dollar, you can create billions and billions of dollars, but you haven't changed the amount of butter that you have. The actual economy has no relation to the measured economy. And the reason is that we are in charge of the measurement, but we're not in charge of the actuality. These people will turn around and they'll say it directly to you, reality is the measure. As whatever can be measured, that's reality. And they deny, and as Kant did, Kant said, well, the thing in itself can't be known. It may be there, but it can't be known. Oh, gee, what a world we are in. Hamlet, I was looking through this, and I lost the place again. It's a marvel. He writes so well, you come across marvelous phrases. And I was just skipping through the play, and when Claudius, the king, finds out that Hamlet is crazy, Hamlet is pretending to be crazy, and he's exhibiting mad behavior, and Claudius uses that word, confusion. He says something about this, oh no, I've forgotten it, this confusion. Well, this whole play is a confusion. We're making these tapes for young people who are going to face the next 50 years. What's the use of all this that we're doing? What's the use of us talking this way and of you reading Hamlet? One use is clearly this. This is where you are. And if you don't plunge yourself into this confusion, you're certainly not going to help yourself or anybody else to find his way out. There is, on the part of, there is a complacency. We've complained about this, I'm sure, before on these tapes. There is a certain complacency on people who have the faith. And it derives exactly from this that we've been talking about, this movement in history. That is, we don't have to worry about all that. We have the faith. The faith has nothing to do with reason. It has nothing to do with the way people think or the way people feel. Look, your brothers, billions of your brothers, really believe at this moment today in their hearts, they believe that the world is weary and stale and flat and unprofitable. They really believe that. You say, I don't believe it. I have the faith. Well, okay. But if you love your brother, you had better come to terms with the fact that that is the way he thinks.
Yeah, I think this is a very crucial point in this course of lectures. I think this is the point where we lose some people. I've seen it happen in classes. We'll start the modern period. People will take the first semester, the second semester, the third semester, and they say, yes, that's absolutely right. I can see everything you said is true. And we get about 2 weeks into the fourth semester, and they say, I can't stand this anymore. I'm quitting. You people take too pessimistic a view of the world. And I think Catholics especially feel this way. They say, well, this is not Catholic, to take this gloomy view of the prospect of the world. After all, we still have the Catholic Church, we still have the faith, the sacraments are all there, Christ died for our sins, we can still go to confession, we don't need to, we can disregard all
It's getting
this.
harder and harder to say that.
That's almost impossible to say, and the fact is, you see, that what we think, what we find is behind it is that they really
But that's a complacency. It's a foolish complacency.
It seems to us so often that these people do not really have what is called the faith. They have some modern version of it which has been affected by all of this.
It's an act of the will.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
they are not in tune with Chaucer, to take that example at all. They have been very deeply affected by the modern world, and who hasn't been? I mean, how can you escape it? It's been around for a very long time. It's been here since Hamlet, and everyone has been reading Hamlet as deserves to be read, as one of the greatest of all works, and Shakespeare in general, and all the authors that come after him, and the whole world has followed the lead of these great men, Descartes and the great scientists Galileo and Immanuel Kant, and even the very best of philosophers and theologians have been affected by it. Who can deny that? Until finally, what you find is people say, well, really, the modern world isn't as bad as you think it is. That's really what it comes to. They say, oh, well, yeah, I know it's bad, but then after all, the world has always been
And
messed up.
then it's very easy for them to sell out the faith.
Yeah.
As their faith is actually very weak. You know, even on the basis of our own experience, there are exceptions. But by and large, I think we can say that the students that we have known who have been through this whole course over several years, the ones who have converted most deeply to the Catholic faith and become the monks and the priests and the laymen who are most deeply Catholic have been the ones who started out the most troubled.
Yeah.
That is, there are some exceptions, but by and large, it's the ones who really understood Hamlet.
They went through it. They went through it.
Whereas those goody Catholics that we got, who were sent into our course because their parents thought they ought to stay away from the modern university, and that somehow we would keep them away from
the
trouble.
moral problems and all that.
All that.
Drugs.
That by and large, they weren't deeply affected and didn't change. Now again, I don't want to be foolish about this, but there's something to it. I think that we've had enough experience to say this, that it's a false faith. There's that person you were describing who dropped out in the last year and said, well, this is too gloomy, I don't want to face it. They had a very, very superficial idea of the faith, and I'll bet you, in many cases, if you checked up on them today, they've lost it. They've lost the faith. Because they didn't really have it.
No, they haven't.
Something hit them. Something came along in life, and their faith wasn't tough.
Yes. No, you have to go through the modern age. A lot of people will say, look, if you think the modern age is so wrong, why don't you just skip it? Why don't we just leave this out? I mean, I agree with you. It's awful. I agree. There are all sorts of things wrong. I think we ought to just skip this and maybe just read. I mean, after all, orthodoxy did survive, didn't it? Why don't you just read the authors in which it all survived? You say, well, you can't do that. You can't do that. You have to go through Hamlet yourself, and you have to recognize that you too are in the middle of these doubts. If you're not, you've missed something.
No.
I don't know how it could happen.
I can't
believe it.
If someone said to me, I'm going to skip Hamlet, I would have to say, in my own life, I can tell you, Hamlet is one of the greatest things that ever happened to me.
Yeah.
And it was terrible. It was terrible.
Sure.
It drove me to the edge of suicide. It was a terrible thing. But I can't imagine life for a modern man without Hamlet. Look, Shakespeare is a great writer. He's as great as Dante. He's as great as Homer. He has articulated a state of the human soul.
And
we can't do without it.
This is our soul. This
Yeah.
this is one aspect of the human soul, and we're in it.
We're in it. And there's no way out except through it.
You can't go around it or over it or just ignore it. You can't live.
One of our friends, just a few weeks ago, you probably recall this, wrote a little article about Thomas Hardy, and he's an Englishman, and he wrote a little article for American readers, and he said that he himself was born in the very town where Tests of the D'Urbervilles takes place, one of Hardy's great novels. And he had in a parenthesis, I've visited America several times, and I don't know, he said, Americans don't read Hardy. Well, they do, but American Catholics don't read Hardy. I mean, I think that's the only people that he meets are Catholics, I think, And I'd have to say, well, American Catholics don't read it.
No, they live or they try to live in a kind of isolation. Faith will.
Sounds like Luther. The faith alone, as if somehow. Yeah, that's right. I mean, the Catholic ghetto, as it used to be called, where we'll all just be uncontaminated by the world. No. It's a temptation. But it's wrong.
Yeah, if you expect, as Mr. Senior was saying, if you expect to somehow have some effect on the things that are obviously wrong with the 20th century, no one, absolutely no one, will deny that there are terrible things wrong in our times. What are you going to do about it? Well, the first thing is you're going to have to understand it before you can do anything about it, before you can even pray about it. You're going to have to understand it. And understanding is not something that you get by just thinking about it in the abstract, as if it isn't something that affects you. You have to experience it. You have to go through it. And one way to go through it is through Hamlet and through these books.
And again, it's dangerous to use the word love because it's so abused, but you have to love your neighbor. And these terrible people, there's a kind of grandeur about some of them. I find myself stuttering here because I can see dangerous implications in what I'm saying. I myself have attacked Graham Greene, for example, the modern Catholic writer, because he overdoes this. he goes down into the gutter, and takes the most despicable people on earth he can find, and then argues somehow that there's a sanctity in them. And I think that's extremely dangerous. I think that Graham Greene's novels have, in some ways, caused a lot of harm. But he's right about something. He's right about something. That is, when I contrast him to, let's say, Joyce Kilmer, I have to say, well, if you give me a choice between the two, I'll take Graham Greene.
Oh, yes.
That is, now, many, again, Europeans won't ever have heard of Joyce Kilmer, but he wrote sentimental, very good, very, very competent poems, sentimental but very competently sentimental poems from a sweet and pure point of view, untouched by the modern world. And he has become a sort of star Catholic writer for Americans. Was he English? I guess he was English. I can't remember. Was he American or English?
I thought he was American.
Maybe you're right. No, I think he may be American. Yeah, I think he's American. I think he'd have to be.
Yeah.
He'd have to be. The English write better than that, I think. Yeah. The American novelist Sinclair Lewis, for example, writes devastating satires on things like that. In Babbitt, he has Babbitt's favorite poem, and it's just hilarious. It's not Joyce Kilmer; it's some other poet that he's making fun of, like Joyce Kilmer. But all of that, that good stuff. Most Catholics buy anthologies of Catholic poetry, and they have a little library of Catholic writers. I know I meet this all the time with my best friends, or people I love and admire so much. They'll always come to me and say, "Well, have you read so and so?" And it'll always be a Catholic author. Yeah. And I'll turn around and say, "Well, have you read Thomas Hardy?"
Thomas Hardy,
no,
yeah.
never heard of him. And they say, "Well, Thomas Hardy was not a Catholic." Okay, that's true. But Thomas Hardy had a love and a profound fear of God. It's everywhere in his work. And I think that Catholics would learn more from him. That I know that they would learn more from him than they would from this goody-goody Catholic.
Well, that's illusion. That is that literature is illusion.
And the movies. Oh
yeah. Oh yeah.
Bing
Crosby. Going My Way. Barry Fitzgerald.
Oh, those movies. They were just enough to make you lose the faith. I mean, when you saw those movies, you had to say, I still
Jean-Paul Sartre isn't all that bad. You say.
And we're not just being cynics here. Those things were really bad, and they've done a lot of harm. You have to read Hamlet. You really do. You have to go through this play to the depths.
No, you want to ask the question whether I always ask the question whether sentimental Catholicism is really any worse than existentialism. Which is worse? Which does more harm? It's hard to tell. People who get into a sentimental view of Catholicism, which is the prevailing view, sentimental, it has no intellectual content whatever. It's not even as high as fideism.
It's not even the will. No,
it's
just feeling.
Right. You say, well, it's awfully hard to get people out of that.